Hi, this is Alan Seid, founder of Cascadia Workshops. I'll talk a little bit more about myself at the end. I just want to jump right in and talk about Ken Wilber's four quadrants, or the four quadrants of his integral model. I've been studying this material since the year 2000. I've read many of Ken's books. In 2004, I attended a 6-day Integral Ecology and Sustainability seminar put on by Integral Institute, which included wonderful faculty as well as some Q&A sessions with Ken himself. And I've been teaching this material for years now, and I'm really excited about it. So what is integral theory? So integral, it's a meta theory, meaning it's a theory of theories. And it attempts to draw from as many fields of human knowledge and sources of wisdom as possible. In fact, Ken is considered the most widely read and influential of contemporary American philosophers, and his framework allows every field of human inquiry to see itself on the same map with every other field and for them to see each other in perspective. So it's a matrix for diverse perspectives to see how they all fit in relation to each other. And it also provides a really interesting template for personal practice. I won't be talking as much about that in this presentation, but I have talked about it elsewhere. Now, my background was originally in ecological sustainability work, and this framework greatly expanded my sense of what sustainability is and can be. Now, integral theory started primarily with Ken, although there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of contributors since then who have augmented and expanded the work that Ken has done. And Ken was guided initially by his own cognitive dissonance. There was a point in time when he was studying Zen Buddhism as well as Gestalt therapy and was seeing ways in which these two different systems agreed with each other, but also, more importantly, ways in which these two systems disagreed with each other. So that really got him to wondering, what's up with that? They're both so solid and so helpful and so functional in so many ways, but, how come they don't actually fit? So his guiding intuition in developing the integral framework was no mind is capable of 100% error. In other words, everybody is right to some extent. Everybody has some aspect of the truth or reality. However, can everyone be equally right? Good question. So the inquiry is, when you take all these different things, for example, all of the hard sciences, all of the social sciences, you take psychology and the arts and everything we can learn from hunter-gatherer societies and other pre-modern cultures, everything from modern times as well as postmodern movements such as the ecological movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement. If you take all these different aspects, all the writings of the saints and mystics, East and West, throughout the centuries, when you put all of this on the table, what's the pattern that shows up? What kind of universe do we live in that allows for all of these things to manifest? So essentially, integral is a set of orienting generalizations, and the detailed specifics will be and are being filled in by experts in each respective field. So the main elements in integral, typically, I've read Ken talk about their 5 main elements. Now I teach 6 because I also teach one of them, Holons, as sort of a precursor to the other ones. Now Wilber's students have divided his work into phases. So there's Wilber 1, Wilber 2, Wilber 3, etc. I teach Wilber 5. Now there are some elements of Wilber 6 that have made it into my workshops, but really my focus is Wilber 5. That's where my expertise lies. So we've got holons, we've got quadrants. Now quadrants are the focus of this particular presentation. But we also have lines of development, also known as multiple intelligences. We have levels of consciousness growth and development, and other levels and structures that become a stable aspect of that next stage of evolution, and states and types. Now, levels are also known as stages and waves. The only thing I'm really focusing on here are quadrants, although I'll say a little bit about holons as we're getting started. So, one interesting thing Ken says in one of the most delicious books I've read in a long time, titled Sex, Ecology, Spirituality. In that book, Ken says something remarkable. He says the universe is not made up of things or processes. The universe is made up of holons. Now, a holon is something that's both a whole unto itself, but it's also a part of a larger whole. So everything is a whole unto itself, as well as part of some larger whole. I'll give some examples as we come up here. Now, that book I mentioned, Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, in the second chapter, Ken outlines 20 tenets that govern all holons. Now, among these, holons exhibit a quality of self-emergence. And evolution, this process of self-emergence and this process of change and growth happens through a process of differentiation, integration. To give you an example of this, I'm really glad that my nose cells and my butt cells are differentiated from each other, right? When you first start out, you have an ova and a sperm. The ova gets fertilized by the sperm and becomes a zygote, and then essentially it starts to grow and differentiate, and that's what happens is there's differentiation, integration. So although my nose cells and my butt cells are differentiated from each other, they're still integrated in this larger organism. As evolution happens, you see a process of transcend and include. I'll give you some examples of this. And transcending and including are sort of nested holons. For example, cells transcend and include molecules, and molecules transcend and include atoms. So you go from atoms to molecules to cells. You can have a letter, say the letter A, and then a word, the word bark, and this is where context makes all the difference, because it's really different when you say the bark of a tree versus when you say the bark of a dog. And then that word is transcended and included by a sentence, which is transcended and included by a paragraph, by a chapter, by a whole book. Same thing happens with images, symbols, concepts, and rules. So while we do have holons in the exterior world, such as atoms, molecules, cells, these nested hierarchies, letter, word, sentence, paragraph, chapter, book, we also have interior. Now, the same rules apply to interior holons. So for example, I'll give you an example of this last one. A red octagon with a white fringe around the outer edge of that red octagon. Simple, that's an image. Now, it doesn't become a symbol until we call it a stop sign. That's a symbol. But then there's this concept, and you see this in children, you see this in little kids where they start to grow in their cognitive understanding. Suddenly there's a concept that the stop sign means you have to stop your car because other cars could be going the other direction. And if you don't stop, then you could crash. And so then we have rules that govern how these things work. So in each of the above examples, the latter components transcend yet include the previous ones. So here are some potentially useful distinctions as we move forward. Depth versus span. When you're talking about this nested hierarchy of holons, in some ways you can think of depth as vertical, like the levels of depth. So for example, atoms to molecules to cells, that would be 3 levels of depth. And you can think of span as horizontal, like different things on the same level. So the more depth you have, the less span, and vice versa. For example, in the universe, in the physical universe, there will always be more atoms than molecules. And there will always be more molecules than cells. And there will always be more cells than organisms if you just count the number of them. So that's one way of talking about depth and span is the more depth, the less span, and vice versa. That's one of the reasons, by the way, why you get very few people like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, these individuals that are the new brand of heroes whom we look up to. We have fewer and fewer of these people who have developed an incredible amount of depth inside themselves. And a really important distinction here is the distinction between hierarchies of domination versus hierarchies of actualization. So a holarchy is a nested hierarchy of holons. Now the word hierarchy has become like a four-letter word in many circles. It's like a bad word. But even, I think it was ecofeminist author Riane Eisler also makes this distinction, as did the creator of nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg, and many other people. There are life-alienating hierarchies of power, domination, power over, and there are also hierarchies that simply have to do with scope, and they are life-serving hierarchies. So in the context of the integral work, we're going to be talking about holarchies, or nested hierarchies of holons. And that brings up an important piece, which is when people talk about, well, what's more important, atoms or molecules or cells? It's sort of a silly question, but people do talk about, at these different levels, like what's actually more important. So it brings up this other distinction of things that are more fundamental, like atoms, versus things that are more significant, such as cells. So we're not talking about some things being more important than others. We're talking about things being more fundamental or more significant. Another example of a nested hierarchy would be the growth from physiosphere, like on the planet Earth. When the planet first emerged, it was rocks and weather and just physical stuff. So we have the physiosphere on the planet, which was transcended and included by the biosphere. When life showed up, there was a whole other level. And now the biosphere, with the arrival of humans and humanity, has been transcended and included by the noosphere, which is human mind and culture. Now there's another distinction I'll mention now, which is between oppressive structures and liberating structures, because so much of my work, when I work with best practices for living in harmony within ourselves, with each other, with the planet, so all the different methodologies, tools, processes that I teach and that I've studied and that I work with in my own life, these are structures that are liberating rather than structures which are oppressive. Let's talk about the quadrants. Oh, and by the way, you are a holon too. So each and every holon has 4 intrinsic dimensions, and now we're really getting into the quadrants here. None of these 4 intrinsic dimensions, or the quadrants, can be reduced to any of the others. Really important point. Even though people try to reduce them, not possible. Each and every holon can also be perceived through each of these 4 aspects or dimensions. So every quadrant has an interior dimension, and it also has an exterior dimension. I'll be giving you increasing examples of this. Every holon also shows up in an individual expression, but holons also show up in a collective expression. Now, Ken calls these the upper left quadrant. We'll use UL for shorthand. The upper right quadrant, the lower left quadrant, and the lower right quadrant. In other words, the upper left quadrant is the individual interior. The upper right quadrant is the individual exterior. I'll give you lots of examples of this. And the lower left quadrant is the interior collective, and the lower right quadrant is the exterior collective. So let's give these a little bit more definition. So the upper left quadrant, the individual interior, is I. But the collective interior is we. Mutual understanding, like shared horizons of meaning. That's this invisible stuff. The interesting thing is that empirical science, in other words, things that can be weighed and measured and quantified, only exist in the right quadrants. The exterior quadrants can be weighed and measured. So we have it and its. So an individual it that can be quantified, weighed, measured, and then collective its. So Let's go a little deeper. In the upper left quadrant of I, this is the level of intention of our experience. So the intrapersonal aspect of, let's say, you as a Holon. So in other words, the subjective aspect. But then in the upper right quadrant, the individual exterior, that would be like your physiology, right? And your observable behavior. So this is objective as opposed to subjective. And then the lower left quadrant, which is the collective interior, that's the interpersonal realm. So intersubjective or cultural, right? The shared understandings that people in different cultures have. In the lower right quadrant, the collective exterior, that's where we find systems, right? These are things that can be weighed and measured, but they're collectively experienced. You can actually tell if it's raining outside or if it's not raining outside. You can go out and prove that and verify that, but also a whole group of us can do that. So this is the interobjective realm, also known as social. Social as opposed to cultural. Now, there are different types of reductionism, and I'll give you some examples of these, but if I happen to be reductionistic to the upper right quadrant, then I say that everything can be reduced to atoms. But if I'm reductionistic to the lower left quadrant, then I will say that everything can be reduced to a cultural construction. It's just because we have some kind of consensus about it that trees exist, for example. However, Ken warns us about this, and he says none of the four quadrants can actually be reduced to any of the other. Now, the way he came up with this is really interesting. When he was writing Sex, Ecology, Spirituality, he says it took him 3 years to write this book, and he was holed up in a house by himself that entire time. I think he saw 4 people in that entire 3 years, one of whom was a doctor just checking up on him. And what he had was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of notepads, each one with a different system. So, for example, one of the great Western mystics, Saint Teresa of Avila, right? She has her stages of spiritual growth. So he had that on a notepad, like a particular system of spiritual growth. And then he had, whole systems theory and that whole system and as many different systems, developmental systems and structures and all on different notepads. And he was just really racking his brain how these all fit together. And what he noticed was this pattern that they happened to fit into these 4 different areas. For example, integral medicine, right? This is one of the things I love about the integral work is it's starting to impact so many different fields. So let's look at medicine, for example. In the upper right quadrant, if you're reductionistic to the upper right quadrant, you'll say that the body is pretty much just like a machine, and that's what we've been doing in allopathic medicine for the past however many hundred years, is that we just think about replaceable parts, and if you manipulate the mechanics and the molecular structures, then you get the outcomes you want, and that's all you have to pay attention to. However, let me give you an example to go through the 4 quadrants to give you an example of integral medicine. So let's take a phenomena like depression. If I'm reductionistic to the upper right quadrant, I'll say, well, the reason that you're experiencing depression is because you need more of certain neurotransmitters in your synapses. So here, take this medication or take this supplement and or do these things, and you will have more dopamine or more of the other neurotransmitters that will help your depression. However, if I'm reductionistic to the upper left quadrant, the I, the subjective quadrant, then I'll say the reason that you're experiencing depression is because you're lacking meaning and purpose in your life. And when you get more meaning and purpose in your life, that'll help with your depression. Well, guess what? Both might be true. And again, if we go into the lower left quadrant, if I live in a culture where it's taboo to talk about your depression, and not only is it taboo, but on top of depression, we add shame, like it's shameful to experience depression, then people don't talk about it as much. Maybe there aren't support groups, and that's going to impact your individual experience in the upper left quadrant, your interior individual subjective experience. What happens in that cultural sphere, in the we space, will impact your experience. And likewise, when we look at the lower right quadrant of it's, the collective exterior, if you live in a culture where there's the infrastructure that makes it easy for you to get to your support group or to access a support group virtually, or where you have access to the medication you need, that's so completely different than if you live in a society where there is no infrastructure for you to get to a support group or to access medication. So that really is going to impact your experience in that upper left individual quadrant. So all four quadrants emerge, they tetra emerge, they emerge together, they influence each other, and they interact with each other. Integral politics. There's a book out there, the title is Integral Politics, and it talks about how do we integrate all four of these perspectives. I'll give you a very simple example. If we just look at the right hand and the left hand quadrants, a lot like your typical liberal view gives causal significance to the exterior quadrants. In other words, it says that things in the exterior are what cause our experience, and whereas your typical, not everybody, but your typical conservative viewpoint might say that the interior quadrants are what cause certain things. So let's use a phenomenon like homelessness. So your typical liberal will see a homeless person and will say, we need to change the social structures that create homelessness because we have social structures that create inequitability. And your typical conservative will look at a homeless person and say, that person lacks initiative or gumption, or they don't have the skills, or they'll ascribe causal significance to that person's interior. Whereas both might be true. I would absolutely love to see a political party that has a significant part of the platform being transpartisan politics, and not only that, but collaborative politics. Because I think if you take the best of liberal views and you take the best of conservative views, you'll actually come up with a better perspective, a perspective that works better than if you only take one or the other. Integral business, same thing. It just so happens that there are, generally speaking, 4 theories of personnel management. And they happen to map out under the 4 quadrants. So instead of having an academic debate about, for example, in the upper left quadrant, we need to empower people and give them professional development and help them work on themselves, and then we'll have a better workplace. Or in the upper right quadrant, where you preference specific behaviors. You just focus on specific, like people must do GTD, getting things done, or people need to, again, take on certain specific behaviors as individuals, then we'll have a better workplace. Versus in the collective interior, we need to have a restorative justice system, or we need to have ways in which we collectively can work out our disagreements or how we handle conflicts in the workplace. So if we just better that, if we get along better and we have more harmonious teams, then we'll have a better workplace. Versus the lower right quadrant, the collective exterior, where, hey, let's give our employees a great playroom with a ping pong table and a basketball hoop, and, the kinds of campuses you're seeing at, some of the Google or other, workplaces that are really kind of cutting edge. Well, it just so happens that all 4 quadrants are in play, and you bring a more whole approach if you include the best from all 4 of the quadrants. Integral communication. I remember being at an event where 2 people were having an argument about racism and power, and they were in this they were deadlocked in this conversation, and it just so happens that one of them was talking about the lower right quadrant, about structures and systems. And the other person was talking about the upper left quadrant. They were talking about in your interior. No one can oppress you unless you give them permission to some extent. And these people were not able to see eye to eye only because they were actually talking about different quadrants. In the upper right, for example, upper right quadrant, individual exterior, that would include a quote-unquote minimal supportive physiology that you need for basic cognitive functioning. For example, if you damage your brain, you're not going to have basic cognitive functioning that you need for communication. So in the upper left, we have experience. In the upper right, we have specific behaviors, specific words we use, specific ways we approach people, whether we reach out for support, that kind of thing. In the lower left, in the collective interior, we would have mutual understanding. And in the lower right, we have systems, such as, for example, restorative systems and practices like restorative circles. And so we can actually bring all 4 quadrants into play. Now, this is true also in sustainability work. Most environmentalists, in my view, have been in the historical past reductionistic to the lower right quadrant, saying it's all about systems. It's all about ecosystems, it's all about economic systems, and if we just fix things on the level of systems, everything else will work out. Well, my personal perspective is we do need all 4 quadrants. So, now another view of the 4 quadrants is right here, and you can see that. I'll let you read that in your own time. You can pause this video if you want there. But the 4 quadrants give us 4 dimensions of all phenomena that are not reducible to each other. And the 4 quadrants give us 4 lenses through which to view aspects of any situation. So take a moment. Here's my invitation to you, or my challenge if that's how you work better. What are ways in which you can apply what you know so far of integral theory, just with this little bit? How can you apply this when you're looking at situations? And what are some other questions that come up for you right now about integral theory and about its relationship to creating positive change in the world and to your own personal growth and development? I'd love for you to send me your questions. I'll give you an example. My friend and colleague, who I look up to and respect so hugely, Barrett Brown, he created a checklist going through all 4 quadrants when there's a sustainable development or social change initiative. He created a personal lens and an initiative lens. And by initiative, it's that specific project, a lens to look at the project for each of the 4 quadrants. So he had questions he created in each of those 4 quadrants. How am I showing up in this quadrant? What's happening for me? And when you add all the other aspects of the integral framework, lines, levels, states, and types, you get a really powerful set of tools from which to view any situation and to really get a more clear understanding of where you can apply leverage to create positive change. So, what are you doing to take your life and your impact to the next level? Send me a comment, send me an email. Comment's better because that engages that collective space where we can start to have a conversation. So I want to tell you a little bit about me and what's going on for me when I share this with you. I work as a trusted advisor, coach, consultant for people committed to both making a difference in the world and to their own personal growth and development. And I help them take their life and impact to the next level. I do it through online programs like this, live events, and coaching and consulting. I invite you to check out the testimonials because what my clients write about me is stunning. It blows my mind. Now, if you've struggled with seeing the world go to hell in a handbasket, and perhaps you've even had a big vision or a project, but you really didn't have any idea how to make it a reality, I have totally been there too. I've felt the depression and the cynicism. I've felt the overwhelm. I've really gone through all those really hard, difficult spaces, and I've spent nearly 30 years researching, learning, and applying best practices for how to live in harmony within ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. And that's the bulk of what I teach and what I bring to my coaching practice. So in that time, I've discovered 8 essential areas. These are like my 8 curriculum areas for changemakers, including how to turn your expertise into your own entrepreneurial venture, because one of the things that I find that so many positive change agents struggle with is they don't want to be stuck at a desk 9 to 5. They want to they want to have more control over their time, more flexibility, more autonomy. But typically business and marketing has been like a four-letter word. It's been a negative thing. And and then we have these belief systems about money and about how money is bad and rich people are bad, and we have all these ways we limit ourselves, and we have no idea how to turn it into a livelihood. And so 80% of my clients are actually business coaching clients, and I bring a compassionate lens as well as an integral lens to the coaching that I do for my clients. I've had clients in every sector, meaning the academic sector, government sector, business sector, um, the private sector, and I've developed a business where I have thousands of email subscribers and clients in 4 continents. So most of my work is via phone or Skype. And when I work with a client, the very first thing we do is we clarify your values, your life purpose, and your vision. And then we create a step-by-step plan to make it a reality. Now, some of the biggest mistakes my clients make is they fall prey to the myth that you have to go it alone, right? Because that's the whole Clint Eastwood era that we've inherited from past generations, is the rugged individualist. And unfortunately, that really limits our ability to create community and to feel belonging and connectedness. And it really limits us because we can raise each other up, we can buoy each other and blow wind in each other's sails and really go so much farther. There's this old African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, travel together. Another one of the biggest mistakes my clients make is getting dragged down by the negativity in the world and failing to secure your own mental and emotional buoyancy. Now, I have a lot to say about that, and I don't want to take a lot more time in this video, but being able to do life-connected mourning and grieving, which is such a human thing and such a healthy thing, actually allows us to create more space inside ourselves for joy and for creativity. Now, it sounds exaggerated, but that's truly my experience. So we need to secure our own mental and emotional buoyancy in order to make a bigger difference and to enjoy life more. Another one of the biggest mistakes my clients make is reinventing the wheel and failing to follow existing processes and methods, which can accelerate your success. So if you follow a proven system, then you're more likely to get where you want to go more quickly. So I would love it if you gave me some feedback. My aim is to help you take it to the next level, whether it's through a video, a blog post, an event, or private coaching. Please tell me, how am I doing? Let me know. Let me know what your experience is, because I want to be better at what I do. Now, I'd like you to consider whether this is the time to have a private thinking partner and a trusted advisor in your corner. So that may or may not be me. But if you think this might be the time to reach out to somebody to really help you take it to the next level, I want you to do that and actually reach out and make that happen for yourself. If you do want to explore that conversation with me for free, no obligation, I'd love for you to sign up for my no cost. I have a 1-hour take it to the next level strategy session. And in that session, we can explore whether or not we're a good match for me to work with you as your coach. There are actually 3 other benefits to that particular conversation. One is getting really, really clear. So what's your ideal? Where would you love to get to? What's the ideal goal for you? And we will clarify that in that session. And also we'll look at what's the number one thing that's been stopping you? What's been getting in your way? And we'll identify that and then chart a path for how to get from where you are to where you want to be. You can sign up for that at cascadiaworkshops.com/session. I haven't shared this much, but the reason that my business is called Cascadia Workshops is because Cascadia is the bioregion in which I live. So this is a tip of the hat to the bioregionalism movement. I encourage you to look it up online if you're not sure what it is. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this video. And I've been teaching workshops for over 20 years. And also there's this sense of workshop in the sense of like Santa's workshop or, a workshop where you're building things and constructing things and tinkering and experimenting and creating things. So there's that element of workshops as well. So cascadiaworkshops.com/session sign up for a free 1 hour consultation with me. I'd love to talk with you to see whether or not we're a good match to work together. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope you've enjoyed this short little presentation.